Helen Keller Lecture at Troy University is designed to promote awareness of those individuals who excel in their chosen fields despite physical or mental challenges. Troy University is fortunate to have several important agencies and organizations who help us present the Keller Lecture. I thank them for making the Helen Keller Lecture one of the signature events of our academic year. Our partners are the Helen Keller Foundation for Research and Education, the Alabama Department of Education, the Alabama Department of Mental Health, the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, and the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind. In 2008, Troy initiated the state's first Bachelor of Science degree in interpreter training in order to help fill a need created by a lack of quality interpreters in Alabama. Today, we have approximately 200 students currently enrolled in the program. Several of our ITP students are here today, assisting our professional team of interpreters, along with ITP faculty member Sam Harris and ITP graduate Chelsea Jones. Please join me in thanking them for their participation in today's event. Every campus needs a champion. Mrs. Janice Hawkins, First Lady of Troy University and an expert in the field of special education, has been a driving force behind this lecture series. Please join me in applauding Mrs. Hawkins' efforts. I also want to thank my colleagues, Mrs. Judy Robertson and Mrs. Cynthia Dodzik, and members of the steering committee for their work in planning this year's event. Now, it is my honor to introduce a gentleman who has led Troy University throughout an era of unprecedented growth. This lecture series is just one example of the many initiatives Dr. Hawkins, Jr. has introduced since becoming Chancellor of Troy University in 1989. Today's presentation has particular significance for Dr. Hawkins because he came to Troy University from the Alabama Institute of the Deaf and Blind in Talladega, where he served as president from 1979 to 1989. In addition, he served as a member of the American Foundation for the Blind's Board of Trustees from 1985 to 1998. Dr. Hawkins has been instrumental in the effort to internationalize Troy University in order to prepare our students to compete on a global stage. His student-first philosophy and commitment to maintaining high academic standards for the benefit of our students has left a permanent imprint on our institution. It is my honor at this time to present the Chancellor of Troy University, Dr. Jack Hawkins, Jr.
Good morning. What a pleasure it is to welcome all of you to the 19th annual lecture series, the Helen Keller Lecture Series. And Dr. Hildebrand mentioned several of the agencies that have been partners in this enterprise since the day we began, and it's always a pleasure. And I'd like to reiterate that appreciation that she expressed to my wife Janice for her encouragement as we began this almost 2 decades ago, and she has since been encouraging in many ways, and I thank her for that. As I reflected upon where we've been with this lecture series and the importance beyond just the message that's delivered, and you can stand by for an inspiring message again today because of the outstanding speaker who will present. But this has been somewhat of a summit for us on an annual basis because it's provided us an opportunity for agency heads from some very, very important agencies in this state to come together and to talk about problems. And, you know, the first step in solving a problem is to frame the problem. And as we have framed several problems over the years, we have sought to partner in the solution of those problems. And one of those solutions has been indeed the interpreter training program that's now becoming really prolific in the production of outstanding interpreters. And just a few years ago, that was only a dream, and now we look at the 18 on the threshold of graduation who will make a huge difference in the delivery of quality care throughout the state and beyond. And so it's a pleasure to welcome the agency heads. I want to introduce to you those people who are here as our special guests and thank them for their time. And as I do so, I'd like to ask them to stand, and if you'll hold your applause, then we will recognize all of them as a group. But students, these are the leaders in the various departments in this state that are interested in employing you. And so when they stand, I want you to take note of their names, and before they leave, I want you to make it a point to introduce yourselves, because all of them are looking for qualified people, and we produce nothing less at Troy University. So please note the people here, and we will thank them all in just a moment. Dr. Hildebrand mentioned several of these agencies, including the Helen Keller Foundation, Mr. Bob Sullentrop. Bob, thank you. Please stand and remain standing. The Institute for Deaf and Blind, and she mentioned the blessing that we experienced for a decade at that institution, and I'm so delighted that several colleagues and former colleagues are here. And I'd also like to tell you that Dr. Douglas Patterson is here this morning, and he was a key leader in that institution throughout our decade there. And Dr. Patterson, would you stand? You're still part of the AIDB family, and now I want to introduce those who are here from the AIDB family. Dr. John Maschia, the president, Dr. Nancy Maschia, Dr. Frida Meacham, Ms. Lynn Hanner, Ms. Carla Smith, and Ms. Amanda Fuller. The Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, Commissioner Carrie Boswell, Mr. Badarius Bell, Ms. Debbie Culver, Mr. Curtis Glisson, and Ms. Terry Roche. The Alabama Department of Education, Ms. Camilla Gibson, and Dr. Linda Felton Smith. And Dr. Felton Smith, welcome home. It's nice to have you here this morning. The Alabama Department of Mental Health, Commissioner Jim Reddick, Ms. Charlene Crump, Mr. Steve Hammerdinger, and the Associate Commissioner, Ms. Beverly Bell Chambly. Please join me in recognizing and thanking these people for their devotion to this cause. This lecture series really does give us an opportunity to celebrate the spirit of Alabama's greatest citizen, the late Miss Helen Keller, a lady who inspired the world by becoming a champion for those who face great odds. And she certainly was a great example of one who faced odds and overcame them. Past lecturers for this series have included Mr. Eric Weinmeyer, the first blind person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And since he did that, he has, I think, crested the great mountains throughout the world. Miss Heather Whitestone, our first deaf lady who became Miss America. The former U.S. Senator Howell Heflin, who was a friend of the Keller family and also an estate attorney for the Keller family. The actress Patty Duke, who portrayed Miss Helen Keller on stage and screen, and last year we had the distinction of having an inspired message from Dr. John Maschia, the president of AIDB. And our speaker series continues the great tradition of inspirational speakers with this year's speaker, Ayendu Budachera, known to his friends and colleagues as Bapin. Bapin was born deaf in India and became blind at age 9. He was forced out of school as he could no longer lip read, and there were no interpreting services available. In 1983, Bapin was sent to the famous Perkins School for the Blind in Watertown, Mass. Of course, that's where Helen Keller received her foundation. There he learned English, Braille, and American Sign Language all at the same time, and Bapin attended college at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. And following his graduation, he began his career of service to those with hearing and vision challenges. He works at the Helen Keller National Center, and as the Technology Development and Training Specialist, he teaches those with a wide range of speech and vision issues how to use computers. In short, Bapin opens up new worlds for his students, which is in keeping with the spirit of Miss Helen Keller and Miss Ann Sullivan, who was her devoted teacher some 125 years ago. Our speaker displays the characteristics of courage, intelligence, and servant leadership that we attempt to instill in all of our students at Troy University. And his story is certainly one that all of us should take to heart and feel grateful in observing. Please welcome our speaker for the 19th Helen Keller Lecture Series, Mr. Ayindu Budachera. Bapin.
Greetings, and a very good morning to every one of you. It is truly an honor for me to come here, and I want to thank Dr. Hawkins for a wonderful introduction. He's given you in a few eloquent words the story of my life and my challenges and my accomplishments. We all learn new things every day, things that change the lives for every one of us, including myself. I'd like to begin this morning by talking about how technology has very much impacted the lives of people who are deafblind throughout the world. For there are new ways of communication through technology. I'd like to start with my story from my personal experience and how technology has played a very important role and how it has applied to the lives of the other deafblind people. I never imagined that the path that I started on years ago would lead me to where I am today. As Dr. Hawkins just said, Helen Keller was always with Ann Sullivan. But where is my Ann Sullivan? I don't just have one Ann Sullivan. I have many, including technology. I guess you could say that technology is my robotic Ann Sullivan. As I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you this morning, I was in the Philippines last November for the World Federation of the Deafblind Conference. And at that time, while I was there, a super typhoon was on its way to hit the Philippines. And many of my friends from America and my family in India were contacting me. They were worried about my safety there. And some warned me to leave before the typhoon hit. And so I discussed it with my wife. She and I are both from countries. I'm from India. My wife is from Korea, South Korea. And she and I both have had lots of experience with cyclones and typhoons because they have often hit our countries. And we both felt that it was important for us to stay and be supportive of the people there in the Philippines. And I felt that if I were to leave, that I would lose rapport. I felt it was important for me to continue on there at the conference. And the interpreters and the individuals who are deaf and blind from throughout the world stayed as well. And we supported one another, and we made sure that the conference proceeded with success. The typhoon did not hit exactly where we were located. It actually hit 500 miles southwest of our location. And of course, understandably, the winds were strong, there was torrential downpours, and if you stood outside, you could feel the force of the wind, but it went away. And sadly, though, there were lives lost, 10,000 lives to be exact. And I think back on that experience last November and how, and perhaps you might wonder how I made my decision to stay. And it was through the use of my iPhone. I use an iPhone 5S with a Braille display, which enables me to check the news updates and to get information about the weather. And it was clear to me that because of my ability to access that the typhoon was not going to hit in the city where I was located, which was Manila, which is where I would be flying from. And so I knew I would not get trapped there. And so I decided to stay. And it was my communication through my friends and my family, through text and email and Facebook, that I was able to keep them informed as to what was going on and our safety. My brother and I use FaceTime. He's in India. So my wife provides tactile sign communication through FaceTime, and that's how I communicate with my brother, and I sign for myself. And I told my brother that I'm fine, I'm still alive, and I'm eating tonight at a gala. And so my brother was greatly relieved to find out through technology and my access to communication. You see, the world has become smaller. Technology has enabled that to happen. During Helen Keller's time, letters were sent from here to India, and it would take a couple of months. But now I have instant communication with India, and we are in a very different world today. I would like to tell you briefly about my background. Dr. Hawkins told you in the introduction that I had become blind, and I did so at the age of 9, and I was in a mainstream program in India. And in that classroom, I sat at the front of the room in order to be able to lip read my teacher. But as you know, sometimes the teacher needed to write on the board. And it was during those situations that I couldn't lip read, or sometimes the teacher had a beard and a goatee, and it was difficult to read. And I think, wanting them to shave off the goatee would have been nice, but sometimes I would ask that. But I remember as I look back, I was the only deaf person in an all-hearing school. And I did not have an interpreter. And so I faced many challenges every day. My parents were both teachers, and they understood the importance of an education regardless of the fact that I was deaf. They felt that the goal was for me to become educated so that I could make a difference in my life and in others. I continued in this school until the 2nd grade. And then around that time, I became blind over a period of 3 months. You see, I was on a soccer team. I was the only deaf player on the team. And I was a very good player because hearing people depend on their hearing a lot. I depended on my sight, so I could watch and I could see and anticipate the ball and I could make goals, and I was able to hit my target accurately. And so the coach of the team selected me to become the team captain. But there was a hearing boy on the team who was very upset that he did not get selected, and he asked me, and he confronted me about it, and he was upset, and he picked up some ashes from the ground because there had been a fire there previously, and those ashes hit me in the face, which caused a retinal detachment. And within 3 months, I was totally blind. Therefore, I was no longer able to lip read for communication. I was resorted to writing print on palm. And you can see on the slide, the picture on the right, my mother writing with print on palm. My language at that time was Bengali. My native language is Bengali. And so communication, as you can well understand, was very slow through print on palm. And so I spent 4 years without the ability to have an education, and I lost my friends. And there was no one really that had the patience or the wherewithal to communicate with me. And I sat idle, if you will. And there was never long conversations, just brief comments. And that was a very difficult time for me, those 4 years without being in school. And as you can imagine, this led to me becoming naughty. Because, you know, kids will be kids. And through the grief that I experienced, my father searched diligently to try to find some way for me to be educated in India. He contacted schools for the deaf. He contacted schools for the blind. And all of them denied my admittance because they had no experience in providing an education for somebody who is deaf and blind, and there were no interpreting services. As a last resort, my father was having a conversation with the principal of a school for the blind, who explained to my father about the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, Watertown. And he told my father that that would be the best place for me. As you know, the standard of India is much lower than American standard of living, and my father was unable to afford to bring me to the United States. And so he started seeking possible scholarships for me to study at the Perkins School for the Blind because, as you know, it would be very expensive. He wrote letters to various directors, to the director of the school, to see if it was possible for them to consider my acceptance, and if there was a possibility of a scholarship. 1 month later, he received a response that they would give me a 1-year scholarship. So my father and I both went to Watertown for a year. And during that first year, after that first year, they accepted for me to continue on. So that was in 1983. And my father received, my father met a businessman who also supported me by providing the airfare for my father and I to come in 1983. And wow, what a culture shock between the two countries. The food, everything was different for me. My first concept of education, for me, I just dreamed of being able to read again and to read stories and books. And I was fascinated with learning language. And so I started reading. They taught me Braille and English and ASL. And I learned A to Z, if you will, in Braille. I learned the alphabet A to Z in 2 hours very quickly for me. I was very motivated. And then I started learning English words. And then I started learning Braille contractions. And I developed quickly in 1 year. And Perkins decided that it would be good for me to stay and not go back to India, because I would be limited in my educational opportunities. So they kept me on at Perkins, and my father supported me during that time. And I stayed there and graduated in 1992. After the first year, my father left. I didn't need him anymore as an interpreter between Bengali and English, and I stayed on. And then my high school was Belmont High School, the Belmont High Prep School. And I studied various subjects. And I was very motivated at school. As I look back, it was important for me to develop skills through education. I continued to develop. I decided to try to find funding in order to continue my education at the university level. I investigated various colleges and universities. I looked at Gallaudet, and I decided on I looked at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I first enrolled at Gardner-Webb University in North Carolina. And then I had to decide what major I would take. The classes were large at Gardner-Webb, and it was more difficult for me. It was more difficult for the professors to give me the extra support that I needed. And I felt that I needed a situation with a smaller class size. So I attended Gardner-Webb for 1 year, which was a good experience. And then I made the decision that the experience was good there. However, the support services were lacking. I needed a quicker turnaround time for having my books translated into Braille, and oftentimes the professors didn't understand the needs and the support needs of persons with deafblindness. And as a result, my GPS suffered. I think I ended the year with a 2.5 GPA, and I was not satisfied with that. And so I decided to investigate other options. I looked at several universities. I looked at one here in Alabama and then Arkansas. And I decided to go to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock because of their disability support services there. And that's where I met a very good friend, someone who became a very good friend. And I had a very good friend that was also going to attend there, and so I decided to transfer at the same time my friend moved there. And the teachers there were a lot more understanding and supportive of my needs. My first year there, I had a 4.0 GPA, and it made a huge difference. While I was there, I became very politically active. I became a leader. I focused on accessibility issues. And I noticed that the university did not have access to the campus. And they didn't have accessible computer equipment. There were some services for blind and some services for people who were deaf and some people who were mobility impaired. And so I wrote a letter to the chancellor of the university, and I shared my concerns about accessibility and on how to improve. 1 week later, the chancellor responded to me very positively, and he agreed that the university needed to provide more support, and he asked me how the campus could be improved. So I met with the chancellor of the university, and there was a committee, and he listened to our recommendations, and then he established an ADA committee to make sure that the university was accessible. And by the time I left, wow, the university was fully accessible to people with disabilities. And that was a benefit for me because it also benefited my education. So I graduated with a 3.2 GPA, which was a much improvement over my experience with Gardner-Webb. I was searching for a job after I graduated. I thought I wanted to be a policy analyst in a law firm, but it was very difficult to find that form of employment. So a friend of mine from Helen Keller National Center, his name is Gene Borkin, said to me that there was a position available in the technology department as an instructor. And I said, well, but I don't have a college degree in computer science. And my friend said, oh, that doesn't matter. You have plenty of experience with technology. It's been your hobby all these years. I think you should go ahead and apply. And so I did. I went to New York for an interview, and I was hired. I moved to New York, and I started as an instructor for 2 years, and then I was promoted to supervisor over the technology department. And then in 2005, I started doing training around the country with individuals who are deaf and blind. And currently, there have been a lot of changes in my job over the last 15 years with Helen Keller. When I think about how technology has impacted my life, my career, it's helped me to serve other people, and I love that. When I went to Perkins School, the very first time I had experience with technology, I was 15 years old, and my first experience was the Apple IIe. Wow, and I would never realize at the time how much technology would become important to me, but I became fascinated over the convenience. And I remember that I was talking to my dad and about technology, and he thought at first that it was silly, but I thought that it would improve the quality of life for people. And it was really technology that led me to where I am today. And as a result, in the past 15 years, I've trained over 500 or 600 deaf-blind people on the use of technology and various types of technology, various ways to access communication. I'd next like to talk to you about how my use of a GPS helps me. I know you all take it for granted, but I depend on it for accessibility. This is my GPS attached to the neck strap. And while I'm out and about, whether I'm walking, I know, for example, the intersections that are nearby and what's in my environment. I can use my GPS while I'm flying. I'll sit near the window of the airplane, and through satellite communication, I get information. The sighted people on an airplane can read the monitor. So I had to find a way to have access to the same information that sighted people have, and this has been wonderful for me. Or for example, if I'm riding with my friends in the car, I can tell them that you are going 70 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. Technology is extremely important. However, it's expensive for people with disabilities. This note taker that's made by Sendero Group costs $7,000. And I realize that deafblind people need technology to have access to communication because the world is closed to them without it. So in 2007, myself and some other members of the American Association of the Deafblind met with senators and members of Congress in Washington, D.C., where we demonstrated various types of equipment and also educated them on how expensive and often the cost makes it inaccessible. TTY would cost $200, but then I would have to use a braille display and it costs $6,000, which is a lot more expensive than a telephone. So I was able to discuss with the senators and the congressmen, and there were many organizations that were representing the disability community to lobby Congress for a Telecommunications Act for individuals who are deaf and blind. So in 2010, President Barack Obama signed into law the Video and Communication Access Act, which was 2010. And one portion includes a designation of funds to set up the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program on an annual basis. And today, there are deafblind people who are getting telecommunication equipment for free, depending on the level of income. And this can include a telephone for texting or email, or a computer with a braille display, or for distance communication through a video phone. So the purpose is for communication access. And that has been a very significant change in technological advancements. So, moving on, I decided to establish the first ever International Deafblind Expo. I've seen many, many expos around the world for a variety of groups and organizations, but there have been none for individuals who are deaf and blind. So I decided to do my own, and I've also established a business. And I've invited businesses and organizations to come to the Expo in Las Vegas. It will be 3 months from now, but I have more than 250 registrants so far. And also, some of those registrants are coming from a variety of other countries. And I would encourage you to consider coming. And there's more information on my website at www.boppengroup.com. My next slide is a picture of my family. And my first guide dog, Dinah. And now I would like to show you a video of me teaching my son to fingerspell. And now I have a video to show you of me walking independently with my son. One day we went for a walk together with my guide dog, and my son is holding my hand, and so the three of us are enjoying an outing together. So to sum up my comments, the power of technology has led me to success, as technology also plays a part in your success. I'm able to live life and to function every day as just as any other person would. I use technology both for personal reasons, for education, and for work and for business. And it's important that we also continue to develop educational opportunities that will lead to your success as students. Again, I want to tell you thank you and just to applaud you. It's been an honor for me to be with you here today, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and we appreciate you so much, and it's very inspiring. You've given us a lot to think about and something to remember always. Before we go, I also want to recognize Ms. Karen Carter, one of our trustees, the chair of the Education Board of Directors. Karen, thank you. Okay. Afterwards, I would like our partners to come up here for some photos. And with that, you are dismissed. Thank you for joining us.